Black woman faces rejection from her billionaire husband's mother, but she turned the table on her. Aliyah Wellington had exactly 60 seconds to prove she wasn't the gold-digging fraud her billionaire mother-in-law believed her to be. Standing in the marble foyer of the Hampton estate, surrounded by New York's elite who whispered behind crystal champagne flutes, she watched Victoria Wellington's perfectly manicured smile sharpen into a weapon designed to destroy her marriage. 3 years of love, sacrifice, and building a life with James was about to be reduced to a single humiliating moment. Unless Aliyah did something her Brooklyn grandmother had taught her long ago: never let anyone make you smaller than you are. Tonight, the woman they underestimated would remind them all that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone assumes doesn't belong there. Before I dive deep into this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Tomorrow I will be sharing another wonderful story with you here. Thank you as you do so. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Aliyah's skin as she adjusted the pearl necklace around her neck. Standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in their Manhattan penthouse, she studied her reflection with the critical eye of someone who had learned that perfection was her only armor. The black Valentino dress hugged her curves elegantly, modest yet striking, a careful balance she'd mastered over the past 2 years of marriage to James Wellington III. Her phone buzzed against the marble vanity. A text from her husband, flying back from Tokyo tonight. Can't wait to see you at Mother's dinner tomorrow. You'll be perfect, as always. Aliyah's smile faltered. Tomorrow's dinner at the Wellington estate would be their largest social gathering since the wedding. James's mother, Victoria Wellington, had made it clear from day one that Aliyah was a phase, a beautiful distraction that would eventually fade from her son's life like all the others before her. But unlike the others, Aliyah had stayed. Unlike the others, James had married her. She touched her wedding ring, a flawless 10-carat diamond that caught the light like captured stars. Sometimes she wondered if she wore it as a symbol of love or as a shield against the whispers that followed her through Manhattan's elite circles. The girl from Brooklyn who snagged a billionaire. She's pretty, but where's her family from? I heard she grew up in the projects. The whispers weren't entirely wrong. Aliyah had grown up in Bed-Stuy, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. But they missed the Columbia MBA, the fluency in 3 languages, the nonprofit she'd founded that had educated over 1,000 underprivileged children. They saw her skin first, her background second, and her achievements last, if at all. 300 miles away, in the Wellington family estate in the Hamptons, Victoria Wellington stood in her pristine white kitchen, directing the staff with the precision of a military general. At 62, she remained striking. Silver hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, designer clothes that whispered rather than shouted wealth, and blue eyes that could cut glass when they needed to. The place cards need to be reset, she told her housekeeper, Margaret. I've made some changes to the seating arrangement. Margaret, who had worked for the family for 30 years, knew better than to question Mrs. Wellington's decisions. But she also knew the woman well enough to recognize the particular tension in her shoulders, the way she arranged and rearranged things when she was plotting. Will Mrs. Aliyah be joining us again? Margaret asked carefully. Victoria's spine stiffened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Wellington, she corrected, though they both knew she refused to think of Aliyah by that name. And yes, unfortunately, she will be. The guest list for tomorrow's dinner read like a who's who of New York society: old money families, political figures, cultural elite. Victoria had spent weeks crafting the perfect guest list, each name chosen with surgical precision. Tomorrow will be more than a dinner party. Tomorrow would be a test that Aliyah was destined to fail. Victoria moved to her study and pulled out a thick manila folder from her locked desk drawer. Inside were photographs, documents, and information that had cost her a considerable sum to obtain. Private investigators were expensive, but they were thorough. She spread the contents across her mahogany desk like a general reviewing battle plans. Photos of a younger Aliyah in her grandmother's cramped apartment. Records from her scholarship applications detailing her family's financial struggles. Documentation of every job she'd worked to put herself through school, waitressing, tutoring, cleaning office buildings late at night. Victoria's manicured finger traced over a photo of Aliyah at age 16, working at a fast food restaurant. Her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, grease stains on her uniform. "This is who you really are," Victoria whispered to the photographer. "And tomorrow everyone will see it." She had invited the Ashfords, old Charleston money who traced their lineage back to the Mayflower. The Vanderbilts would be there, along with the Astors. People who understood breeding, heritage, the importance of marrying within one's class. People who would immediately recognize that Aliyah didn't belong. Victoria's phone rang. James calling from his jet. "Mother, I can't tell you how excited I am for you and Aliyah to finally have some real time together." His voice crackled through the connection. "She's been nervous about tomorrow, but I keep telling her you're going to love her once you really get to know her." "Of course, darling," Victoria replied, her voice honey-sweet. "I'm sure it will be, illuminating for everyone involved." After she hung up, Victoria returned to the photographs. Tomorrow she would remind everyone, including her son, exactly what kind of woman he had married. And more importantly, she would remind Aliyah of exactly where she came from. The game was set. The players were in position. But Victoria Wellington had no idea that the young woman she was preparing to destroy had been fighting battles her entire life, and had never lost one that truly mattered. The Wellington estate sprawled across 12 manicured acres, its Georgian architecture commanding respect from every angle. Aliyah stepped out of the Tesla, James's hand warm and reassuring at the small of her back. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves and old money, a combination that always made her feel like an intruder in a museum. "You look stunning," James whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. She wore emerald silk that complemented her complexion perfectly, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that had taken her stylist 3 hours to perfect. "Your mother's guests are already here," Aliyah observed, noting the line of luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Maseratis, a vintage Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than most people's homes. "They're going to love you," James said, though she caught the slight tension in his voice. Even he wasn't entirely sure what his mother had planned. Victoria greeted them at the front door, resplendent in cream-colored Chanel, her smile as perfectly constructed as her outfit. "James, darling." She kissed both his cheeks, then turned to Aliyah with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Aliyah, how vibrant you look tonight." The word vibrant landed like a small slap. It was Victoria's code for too much, too colorful, too bold, too present. The drawing room buzzed with conversation that died and resumed in waves as Aliyah entered. She recognized the pattern: curious glances, quick assessments, whispered evaluations. These people had perfected the art of judgment, disguised as politeness. "Everyone, you remember my daughter-in-law," Victoria announced, her voice carrying across the room like a dinner bell. "Aliyah is from Brooklyn. She has such interesting stories about growing up there." Heat prickled at the base of Aliyah's neck. The way Victoria said Brooklyn made it sound like a foreign country, somewhere exotic and dangerous that refined people might visit, but never actually live. Charles Ashford, a man whose family had owned half of Charleston for 2 centuries, extended his hand. "Brooklyn, you say? Fascinating. What part?" "Bedford-Stuyvesant," Aliyah replied evenly, watching his eyebrows lift slightly. "Oh." His wife, Bitsy, appeared at his elbow like a pale ghost. "That's urban, isn't it?" Before Aliyah could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the momentary silence. "Oh, but that's not the most interesting part of Aliyah's story." She moved to the center of the room, commanding attention like a conductor raising her baton. "James, darling, you've never told our friends about how you two met." James shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, perhaps we should." "Nonsense. It's such a romantic story." Victoria's eyes glittered with something that made Aliyah's stomach drop. "It was at that little community center fundraiser, wasn't it? The one in, where was it again, dear?" Aliyah felt the trap closing around her, but she lifted her chin. "The Brownsville Community Center. I founded the literacy program there." "Founded," Victoria repeated, savoring the word. How ambitious. And you were working there when you met James. I was volunteering there, Aliyah corrected, but Victoria pressed on like a shark scenting blood. James was there with his foundation board, doing one of their charity visits. So generous of him to give back to the less fortunate. Victoria moved to the mantelpiece, where she had carefully placed a photo, not the elegant wedding portrait from the main hallway, but a candid shot from that day 2 years ago. Aliyah in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a ponytail, paint on her hands from helping children with an art project. The room had gone completely silent now. I think it's wonderful when people pull themselves up, continued Priscilla Vanderbilt, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that came wrapped in silk. It must have been quite an adjustment coming into our world. Your world. Aliyah's voice was quiet, but it carried. Victoria smiled like a cat with cream on its whiskers. Well, darling, surely you can see the difference. This is a very particular society, with very particular expectations. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. James stepped forward, his face reddening, but Aliyah placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. You're absolutely right, Victoria. Aliyah's voice was steady, almost conversational. This is a very particular society. One where people are judged by the size of their trust funds rather than the content of their character. Where charity is a tax write-off and compassion is a photo opportunity. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Where children learn that their worth is measured by their zip code, and adults believe that an accident of birth somehow makes them superior to someone who actually earned their place at the table. Victoria's carefully constructed smile was beginning to crack. I hardly think. But you're right about one thing, Aliyah continued, her voice gaining strength. I am different from you. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to choose between textbooks and groceries. I know what it's like to fight for everything I have. She looked around the room, meeting each uncomfortable gaze. And because I know those things, I also know the value of kindness. Real kindness, not the kind that comes with conditions and expiration dates. The silence that followed was deafening. James stared at his wife with something that looked like awe and terror. Victoria stood frozen, her weapon turned against her. Then, from the doorway, came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. Well said, young lady. Very well said indeed. Everyone turned to see an elderly black man in an impeccable tuxedo, his silver hair gleaming, his dark eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. He stepped into the room with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere he chose to be. Victoria's face went from pale to gray. Hello, Victoria, the man said, his voice warm as honey and twice as smooth. I hope you don't mind that I came a bit early. I was so looking forward to meeting the young woman who's captured James's heart. The elderly man's presence seemed to suck all the air from the room. Victoria's carefully orchestrated dinner party had become a stage she no longer controlled, and the terror in her eyes was almost palpable. I wasn't expecting you, Thomas, Victoria managed, her voice strained like a wire about to snap. I'm sure you weren't. Thomas Blackwood moved into the room with the easy grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. At 75, he carried himself like royalty, and for good reason. He was one of the wealthiest men in America, his tech empire spanning 3 decades. But when I heard you were finally meeting your son's wife properly, I simply had to attend. Aliyah felt James tense beside her. She'd heard of Thomas Blackwood, of course, everyone had. But James had never mentioned that his family knew the man personally. Thomas, perhaps we should, Victoria began, but he held up a hand. Oh, don't mind me. I was quite enjoying the conversation. His eyes found Aliyah's, and she saw something there, recognition, perhaps even approval. Young lady, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Thomas Blackwood. Aliyah Wellington, she replied, accepting his offered hand. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow reassuring. Wellington, he repeated, with emphasis on her married name. A beautiful name for a remarkable woman, I'm sure. The pointed comment wasn't lost on anyone, especially Victoria, whose face had gone from pale to flushed. Charles Ashford cleared his throat uncomfortably, while his wife Bitsy suddenly found her champagne glass fascinating. "Now then," Thomas continued, turning back to the room, "I believe we were discussing the value of character over circumstance? Such a refreshing topic for a dinner party." Victoria recovered quickly, her social armor snapping back into place. "Thomas, you're being dramatic. We were simply getting to know Aliyah better. There's nothing wrong with understanding someone's background." "Background," Thomas mused. "Interesting word choice. Tell me, Victoria, what exactly constitutes the right kind of background in your estimation?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. James stepped forward, his jaw tight with frustration. "That's enough. Mother, I won't have you." "James, darling, don't be so sensitive," Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp with desperation. "I'm simply trying to help everyone understand the complexity of your situation." "My situation?" Aliyah's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean my marriage to your son?" "I mean the adjustments that are necessary when two very different worlds collide." Victoria's mask was slipping, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. "Surely you can understand that this life, these people, these expectations, they're not something one simply walks into." "You're right," Aliyah said, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "Some of us have to earn our place." Priscilla Vanderbilt, emboldened by what she perceived as Victoria's support, decided to join the attack. "It's not about earning, dear. It's about breeding. About understanding the unspoken rules, the proper ways of doing things. About knowing your place?" Aliyah finished, her voice cutting through Priscilla's condescension like a blade. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, charged with electricity dangerous. Thomas Blackwood chuckled, a sound that seemed to echo off the walls. "Breeding," he repeated. "How fascinating. And what, pray tell, constitutes proper breeding, Mrs. Vanderbilt?" Priscilla flustered, clearly unprepared to defend her statement to one of the most powerful men in the country. "Well, I simply meant family history, social connections, cultural understanding." "Cultural understanding," Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Like understanding that wealth without wisdom is worthless? That privilege without purpose is pathetic? That kind of cultural understanding." Victoria's control was slipping entirely now. "Thomas, you're twisting everything. This isn't about..." "About what, Victoria? About race? About class? About the fact that this remarkable young woman threatens everything you think you know about yourself." The words hit like physical blows. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the artwork on the walls, the pattern of the carpet, anything but the explosive confrontation unfolding before them. James grabbed Aliyah's hand. "We're leaving. Now." But Aliyah didn't move. She was done running, done accommodating, done making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were too narrow for her spirit. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not leaving." "Aliyah," James started, but she squeezed his hand, silencing him. "I've spent 2 years trying to prove I belong here," she continued, her voice growing stronger. 2 years making myself acceptable to people who were never going to accept me anyway. 2 years pretending that their approval mattered more than my own self-respect. She looked directly at Victoria, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. "But I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I know who I am. I know what I've accomplished. I know what I've overcome." Her voice rose slightly, filled with a power that seemed to vibrate through the room. "And I know that my worth isn't determined by your opinion of it." Victoria's carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and she was grasping at straws. "James, surely you can see." "I can see everything, Mother." James's voice was cold, colder than anyone had ever heard it. "I can see exactly who you are. And more importantly, I can see exactly who my wife is." Thomas Blackwood smiled, an expression of pure satisfaction. "Well then," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "This has been enlightening. Victoria, I believe dinner is served? I'm suddenly quite hungry." But as the group began to move awkwardly toward the dining room, Thomas caught Aliyah's arm gently. "A word, my dear?" Victoria watched in horror as the most powerful man in the room pulled her daughter-in-law aside, whispering something that made Aliyah's eyes widen in shock. Whatever Thomas Blackwood was telling her, Victoria knew with cold certainty that it was going to change everything. The dining room felt like a battlefield where the weapons were crystal goblets and the ammunition was loaded silently. Victoria had spent hours arranging the seating, Aliyah positioned between Charles Ashford and Priscilla Vanderbilt, as far from James as possible. But Thomas Blackwood had quietly switched place cards, positioning himself directly across from Aliyah and moving James to her right side. "The Wellington family has such a rich history," Thomas said conversationally as the first course was served. "Victoria, remind me, how many generations has your family been in America?" Victoria's spoon clinked against her soup bowl. "5 generations. We trace our lineage back to 1847, Thomas finished smoothly. "Irish immigrants fleeing the potato famine, if I recall correctly. Your great-great-grandfather Patrick O'Malley changed the family name to Wellington when he arrived at Ellis Island." The color drained from Victoria's face. Beside her, James looked stunned. This was family history he'd apparently never heard. That's not," Victoria stammered. "Oh, but it is," Thomas continued, his voice gentle but implacable. "Fascinating how family stories evolve over time, isn't it? Patrick was a dock worker in Boston before he moved to New York. Quite the entrepreneur, actually, built his first fortune in the garment district." Aliyah watched Victoria's carefully constructed world crack a little more. The woman who had spent the evening attacking her for her humble beginnings was herself descended from immigrants who had fled poverty and discrimination. "Thomas," Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, "surely this isn't appropriate dinner conversation, isn't it?" Thomas smiled. "I thought we were discussing the importance of knowing where one comes from. The value of, what did you call it, breeding?" Charles Ashford, sensing the shift in power, attempted to change the subject. "The weather has been quite unpredictable this season." But Thomas wasn't finished. "You know, Aliyah, I've been following your work with the Blackwood Foundation. Your literacy program has been remarkably successful." Aliyah nearly choked on her wine. "The Blackwood Foundation? Oh yes. We've been your largest anonymous donor for the past 3 years. $3 million to be precise." Thomas's eyes twinkled with mischief as he watched the table's reaction. "James never mentioned that your program had caught the attention of major philanthropists." James looked as shocked as everyone else. "No, she never said." "Because she didn't know," Thomas explained. "True philanthropy doesn't require recognition. But I've been watching your work, young lady. The way you've expanded from one community center to 12 across the city. The scholarship program you created. The children whose lives you've changed." Victoria's fork trembled in her hand. The woman she'd tried to paint as an opportunistic gold digger was apparently changing lives on a scale that dwarfed Victoria's own charitable activities. "In fact," Thomas continued, seemingly unaware of the devastation he was causing to Victoria's narrative, "I've been hoping to discuss expanding the program nationally. My board has been particularly impressed with your innovative teaching methods." Priscilla Vanderbilt, perhaps sensing that the evening had taken a dramatic turn against their hostess, attempted to salvage something. "Well, charity work is certainly admirable. But surely you understand, Mr. Blackwood, that there are certain social expectations." "What I understand," Thomas interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut glass, "is that this young woman has done more to improve her community in 5 years than most of the people at this table have done in their entire lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's carefully planned assassination of Aliyah's character had become her own public execution. "Mother," James said quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment and something that might have been grief. "Why?" Victoria looked around the table at faces that had once shown her deference and now showed only discomfort and pity. "I was protecting you," she whispered. "I was protecting our family." "From what?" Aliyah asked, her voice gentle despite everything. "From love? From happiness? From someone who makes your son better than he was before?" "From making a mistake," Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. "From being fooled by someone who saw an opportunity and took it." The words hung in the air like poison gas. James started to stand, his face flushed with anger, but Aliyah placed a restraining hand on his arm. "You think I married James for his money," Aliyah said. "It wasn't a question." "I know you did," Victoria replied, her voice bitter with conviction. Thomas Blackwood set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. "Victoria, there's something else you should know about your daughter-in-law." Victoria's eyes darted to him, fear flickering across her features. "The literacy program she founded? It's not her only business venture. Perhaps you should look into the consulting firm she started in college. The one that helped her put herself through Columbia. The one that currently has contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies." He paused, letting the information sink in. "You see, Aliyah has never needed your son's money. Her net worth is approximately $15 million. Self-made, entirely through her own efforts." The sound of Priscilla Vanderbilt's wine glass shattering against the floor punctuated the revelation. Victoria sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and horror. "She could have married anyone," Thomas continued relentlessly. "She chose James because she loves him. Something you might have discovered if you'd bothered to get to know her instead of trying to destroy her." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need some air." But as she moved toward the French doors leading to the terrace, her foot caught in her chair leg. She stumbled, her ankle twisting beneath her with an audible crack. "Victoria!" James jumped up as his mother crumpled to the floor, her face white with pain. And suddenly, the woman who had spent the evening trying to humiliate Aliyah was lying helpless at her feet, entirely dependent on the mercy of the person she had tried to destroy. The paramedics had come and gone, pronouncing Victoria's ankle sprained but not broken. As the other guests made their awkward exits, Priscilla Vanderbilt practically fleeing to her car, Aliyah found herself alone with Victoria in the sitting room. James had gone to call Victoria's doctor, and Thomas had stepped outside to take a business call, leaving the two women in an uneasy silence. Victoria sat propped on the sofa, her injured foot elevated on a velvet ottoman, her perfect composure finally shattered. Without her armor of superiority, she looked smaller, older, almost fragile. "You don't have to stay," Victoria said stiffly, not meeting Aliyah's eyes. "I'm sure you have better things to do than tend to someone who's been unkind to you." Aliyah adjusted the ice pack on Victoria's ankle. Unkind is an interesting way to describe attempted character assassination. A flush crept up Victoria's neck. "I was protecting my son." "From what, exactly?" Aliyah settled into the chair across from her. "From being happy?" Victoria's hands twisted in her lap, her wedding ring catching the lamplight. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but then her spine straightened with familiar Wellington steel. "You don't understand what this family has been through," Victoria said quietly. "What James has been through. Then help me understand." Victoria was quiet for so long that Aliyah thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "James's first wife was beautiful, charming, from all the right families." Victoria's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "Penelope Worthington. Perfect pedigree, perfect education, perfect everything." Aliyah felt something cold settle in her stomach. James had mentioned his first marriage only once, briefly, saying it had ended badly. "She was everything I thought I wanted for him," Victoria continued, her voice hollow. "Everything I thought would make him happy. And for 3 years, it seemed like it did." "What happened?" Victoria's laugh was bitter, broken. She was sleeping with his business partner. Had been for 2 years. When James found out, she didn't just leave. She took $50 million from the company accounts and disappeared to Monaco with her lover. The words hit Aliyah like physical blows. She thought of James's occasional moments of distance, the way he sometimes seemed to study her as if looking for cracks in her facade. "But the money wasn't the worst part," Victoria continued, tears finally spilling over. James had wanted children so desperately. Penelope told him she was trying, that they just needed more time. What she didn't tell him was that she'd been on birth control the entire marriage. She never had any intention of having his children. Aliyah's hand went to her throat, where James's grandmother's necklace rested, the the one he'd given her on their first anniversary, saying he'd been saving it for someone special. She destroyed him, Victoria whispered. For 2 years after she left, he wouldn't date anyone, wouldn't trust anyone. I watched my son become a shell of himself, convinced that every woman who showed interest was after his money or status. Understanding began to dawn, cold and terrible. So when James met me, a beautiful woman from a poor background who worked at a community center he was funding, Victoria's voice was heavy with regret. I saw Penelope all over again. Different packaging, same game. But I'm not Penelope. No, Victoria admitted, her voice breaking completely. You're everything she wasn't. You're kind where she was calculating. You're genuine where she was false. You make him laugh the way he used to before she broke him. The sitting room door opened, and Thomas Blackwood stepped back inside, his expression grave. Forgive me, ladies, but I couldn't help overhearing. He moved to stand by the fireplace, his silhouette imposing against the flames. Victoria, there's something you need to know about Penelope Worthington. Victoria looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean she didn't just randomly target your son. Thomas's voice was carefully controlled. Penelope was hired. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Aliyah felt the blood drain from her face. Hired? Victoria's voice was barely audible. By your business rival, Harrison Caldwell. He wanted to destroy James's focus, compromise his judgment, and gain access to Wellington Industries' strategic plans. Thomas's expression was grim. Penelope was a professional. She'd done it before to other wealthy men. James was just another mark. Victoria's face went ashen. How do you know this? Because Harrison Caldwell tried to hire her to do the same thing to me 5 years earlier. When I declined to be seduced by her charms, he moved on to his next target. Thomas's eyes found Victoria's. Your son. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Victoria's carefully constructed worldview, the one that had led her to attack Aliyah, was built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. James doesn't know, Thomas continued. I've kept the information to myself, thinking it would only cause him more pain. But after tonight, after seeing what your fear has done to your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Oh God, Victoria whispered, her face crumpling. What have I done? Aliyah felt tears stinging her eyes as the full picture became clear. Victoria's cruelty wasn't born from simple prejudice. It was born from terror. Terror of watching her son be destroyed again by someone she believed was using him. You were trying to protect him, Aliyah said softly. You saw his first wife destroy him, and you thought. I thought you were going to do the same thing. Victoria's sobs came freely now. I thought I was saving him from making the same mistake twice. The irony was devastating. In trying to protect James from a love she believed was false, Victoria had nearly destroyed the first real love he'd found since his heart was broken. The question is, Thomas said quietly, what are we going to do about it now? Outside, they could hear James's footsteps approaching. In moments, he would return to find his mother and wife in tears, the truth of his first marriage's destruction laid bare. And Aliyah realized that the real test of their love was just beginning. When James returned to the sitting room, he found his mother and wife sitting in silence, both looking emotionally drained. Thomas had discreetly excused himself, leaving them space to process what had been revealed. The doctor will be here in an hour, James announced, then stopped, studying their faces. What happened? You both look like we've been talking, Aliyah said softly. Really talking for the first time. James settled onto the arm of Aliyah's chair, his hand finding her shoulder. Mother, are you all right? Victoria looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw past the successful businessman to the wounded boy who had trusted too easily and paid too dearly for it. I owe you both an apology, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Several apologies, actually. Mother. No, James. Let me say this. Victoria shifted on the sofa, wincing as her ankle protested. I've been a terrible mother-in-law to Aliyah. I've been suspicious and cruel and completely unfair. James frowned, confusion evident in his expression. I don't understand. What brought this on? Victoria and Aliyah exchanged a look a moment of silent communication that spoke to the understanding they had just reached. Your mother was protecting you, Aliyah said gently. She was afraid I was going to hurt you the way Penelope did. James's face darkened at the mention of his ex-wife. We don't need to talk about. Yes, we do, Victoria interrupted. We should have talked about it years ago. About what she did to you. About how it changed you. About how my fear of it happening again has been poisoning my relationship with the woman you love. Aliyah watched emotions play across James's face. Pain, anger, confusion, and something that might have been relief. You thought Aliyah was like Penelope? James asked quietly. I thought any woman who could capture your heart so completely must be playing some kind of game, Victoria admitted. I couldn't believe that someone so accomplished, so beautiful, so genuinely good could simply love you for who you are. Mother, James's voice was painful. Because Penelope broke something in all of us, didn't she? Victoria continued, tears threatening again. She made me suspicious of every woman who came near you. She made you afraid to trust completely. She poisoned the well of our family's capacity for joy. Aliyah felt James's hand tighten on her shoulder. She reached up to cover it with her own. But I've been watching you these past 2 years, Victoria continued, looking directly at Aliyah. I've been looking for cracks, for signs that you were pretending. And you know what I found? What? Aliyah asked softly. I found a woman who brings my son coffee in bed every morning because she knows he's not human before his first cup. A woman who remembers that he likes his shirts pressed a certain way and that he gets nervous before board meetings and needs exactly 3 minutes of quiet before he makes important phone calls. James looked surprised. You noticed all that? I notice everything when it comes to my children, Victoria said with a watery smile. I noticed that Aliyah learned to make your grandmother's apple pie because she saw how much you missed it. I noticed that she keeps fresh flowers in your office because she knows they make you happy. I noticed that she never once asked you to change anything about yourself. She just loved you exactly as you are. Aliyah felt tears threatening. You saw all of that, but you still thought. I still thought it was an act, Victoria whispered. Because I couldn't believe that my son deserved that kind of love after what happened before. I couldn't believe that lightning could strike twice, but in a good way this time. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. James slid down into the chair properly, pulling Aliyah against his side. I should have told you about Penelope, he said to Aliyah. All of it. I should have explained why I sometimes get that look when you're being too good to me. What look? She asked. The look that says I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. The look that says I can't quite believe you're real. Victoria watched her son hold his wife, saw the way they fit together like puzzle pieces, and felt a stab of regret so sharp it took her breath away. I've wasted 2 years, she said suddenly. In 2 years I could have been getting to know an extraordinary woman. For 2 years I could have been celebrating my son's happiness instead of trying to destroy it. It's not too late, Aliyah said quietly. Is it? Victoria's eyes filled with hope and desperate gratitude. Do you mean that? I mean that I love your son more than life itself. And you're his mother, which makes you family. And family. Aliyah paused, thinking of her grandmother who had raised her with such wisdom and grace. Family forgives. Family finds a way to heal. Even when family has been as awful as I have. Aliyah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given Victoria since they'd met. Especially then. James looked between the 2 women he loved most in the world, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. Are you saying? I'm saying your mother and I are going to start over, Aliyah announced. If she's willing. Victoria tried to sit up straighter, then winced as her ankle reminded her of her limitations. I would like nothing more, but I have no idea how to. I've been so horrible to you. Well, Aliyah said, standing and moving to sit on the coffee table in front of Victoria, we could start with you teaching me to make that apple pie properly. James says mine is close, but not quite right. Victoria's face lit up with something that might have been joy. You'd want to learn from me? I'd want to learn from my mother-in-law, Aliyah corrected gently. If she's willing to teach me. For the first time in 2 years, Victoria Wellington looked at Aliyah and saw not a threat to be eliminated, but a daughter to be treasured. I'd be honored, she whispered. James closed his eyes, feeling a weight he'd carried for years finally lift from his shoulders. His family was healing. His heart was whole. But outside, storm clouds were gathering that would test this fragile new bond in ways none of them could imagine. 3 days later, Aliyah was in Victoria's kitchen, flour dusting her dark hands as she attempted to master the Wellington family apple pie recipe. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and possibility, and for the first time since her marriage, she felt like she might actually belong in this world. "The secret is in the butter temperature," Victoria was saying, her ankle propped on a nearby stool as she supervised from her chair. "Too warm, and the crust will be tough. Too cold, and it won't incorporate properly." Aliyah smiled, carefully working the dough. "My grandmother always said cooking was about love, not just ingredients." "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was everything to me," Aliyah said softly. "She died when I was in graduate school. I would have given anything for her to meet James, to see that I found someone who loves me the way my grandfather loved her." Victoria's expression softened. "I'm sure she would have adored him. And be so proud of you." The moment was interrupted by James bursting through the kitchen door, his face ashen, his phone clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "James?" Aliyah wiped her hands on her apron, immediately alarmed. "What's wrong?" He looked between his wife and mother, his expression a mixture of fury and devastation. "I just got off the phone with my lawyer." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What's happened?" "Someone has been feeding information to the press," James said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Personal information. Private family details. Financial records that should have been sealed." Aliyah felt the world tilt slightly. "What kind of information?" James pulled up something on his phone, his hands shaking slightly. "Pictures. Documents. A complete expose about your background, your family, your grandmother's death." He looked up at her, pain written across his features. "They know everything, Aliyah. Everything." The kitchen fell into terrible silence. Victoria reached for her son's phone, her face growing paler as she scrolled through what appeared to be a leaked story. "From projects to penthouse, the real story behind the Wellington marriage," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "How a Brooklyn girl used tragedy and charity to land a billionaire." Aliyah felt like she'd been slapped. "They're making it sound like I was manipulated. Like you used your grandmother's death and your work with underprivileged children as some kind of elaborate scheme," James finished, his voice hollow. "Like our entire relationship is based on lies." Victoria continued reading, her expression growing more horrified by the moment. "They have pictures of your apartment in Bed-Stuy. Details about the jobs you worked to put yourself through school. Even—" She stopped, her face going white. "What?" Aliyah demanded. "Even quotes from your ex-boyfriend from college. Anthony Mason. He says—" Victoria's voice faltered. James grabbed the phone back. "She was always ambitious," he read, his voice mechanical. "Always talking about wanting to marry rich, wanting a different life. She used to practice talking like rich people, researching wealthy families. I'm not surprised she landed a billionaire. She's been planning it since college." The words hit Aliyah like physical blows. Anthony, bitter, jealous Anthony, who had never forgiven her for ending their relationship when she realized they wanted different things from life. "That's not true," she whispered, but even as she said it, she could see doubt creeping into James's eyes. "The article says you researched my family extensively before we met," James continued, his voice growing colder. "That you knew exactly which charity events I'd be attending. That our chance meeting was anything but chance." "James, that's not. Is it true that you researched wealthy families in college?" The question came out like an accusation. Aliyah felt trapped, cornered. Yes, but not for the reasons they're saying. I was studying socioeconomic disparities for my thesis. I was trying to understand. Is it true that you knew who I was before we met?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Aliyah looked at her husband's face and saw Penelope's ghost looking back at her. The suspicion, the hurt, the growing certainty that he'd been played for a fool again. She started, then stopped. Because the truth was complicated, and she could see that James was in no mood for complications. "Answer me, Aliyah. Did you know who I was before that day at the community center?" "Yes," she whispered, and watched something die in his eyes. Victoria gasped, her hand going to her throat. "Aliyah? But not like they're saying." Aliyah rushed on, desperation creeping into her voice. "I knew you were on the foundation board. I knew you might visit, but I didn't plan to meet you. I didn't orchestrate anything. I was just doing my job, working with the children. Just like Penelope was just modeling when we met," James said bitterly. "Just like she was just being friendly when she showed interest in my work. I am not Penelope." Aliyah's voice cracked with emotion. "Aren't you?" James's voice was like ice. "A beautiful woman from a poor background who researched my family, knew exactly who I was, positioned herself to meet me, and then played the role of the perfect woman until she had a ring on her finger?" Each word was a knife, cutting deeper than the last. Aliyah felt her carefully built world crumbling around her. "That's not what happened, and you know it," she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "Do I?" James stepped back from her, and the physical distance felt like a chasm. "Because right now, I don't know what's real anymore. Was any of it real, Aliyah? Did you ever love me, or was I just the mark who fell for your act?" The question shattered something inside her. 3 years of marriage, of building a life together, of believing they had something unbreakable, reduced to this moment of devastating doubt. "How can you ask me that?" she whispered. "Because I've been here before," James said, his voice breaking. "I've been the fool who believed in love only to find out it was a lie. And I swore I'd never let it happen again." Victoria watched her son and daughter-in-law destroy each other with words, and realized that her worst fears were coming true. Not because Aliyah was like Penelope, but because James's wounds had never truly healed. "James," Victoria started, but he held up a hand. "I need time to think," he said, not looking at either of them. I need to be alone." And with that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving Aliyah standing among the ruins of her apple pie and her marriage, flour in her hair and tears streaming down her cheeks. The fragile bond they had built lay shattered on the kitchen floor, and Victoria feared it might be broken beyond repair. James sat alone in his Manhattan office at 3 in the morning, the city sprawling endlessly below him through floor-to-ceiling windows. The leaked article lay spread across his desk alongside private investigation reports that had arrived within hours of his request. His head was in his hands, and for the first time in years, he felt like that broken man who had discovered Penelope's betrayal. The investigation had confirmed what the article claimed. Aliyah had indeed researched his family extensively during college. Her academic thesis on wealth inequality had included detailed case studies of several prominent families, including the Wellingtons. She had known exactly who he was when they met, but it also revealed something else. Anthony Mason, Aliyah's ex-boyfriend, had been paid $50,000 for his quotes. The payment had come from Harrison Caldwell, the same man who had hired Penelope to destroy James years ago. James stared at that revelation, his mind reeling. Caldwell was still playing games, still trying to destroy him through the women he loved. But knowing that Anthony had been paid to lie didn't change the fact that Aliyah had kept the truth from him. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "She's still here. She's been crying for hours. Please come home." James closed his eyes, remembering the look on Aliyah's face when he'd asked if any of their love was real. The devastation, the disbelief, the way she'd reached for him, and he'd stepped back. Another buzz. This time, Thomas Blackwood. "I've been investigating the leak. We need to talk. Tonight." Aliyah sat curled in the corner of Victoria's living room, still wearing her flour-dusted apron, her eyes swollen from crying. Victoria had moved from the kitchen to sit beside her, and for the past hour, she had simply held Aliyah's hand in silence. "I should go," Aliyah finally whispered. "I should pack my things and leave before this gets worse." "Absolutely not," Victoria said firmly. "This is your home. You are my daughter-in-law, and you belong here. But if what they're saying makes James doubt—" "Then my son is an idiot," Victoria interrupted. "And I should know. I was an idiot too, until I learned to see past my own fears." Aliyah looked up at her, confusion evident through her tears. How can you defend me? I did research on his family. I did know who he was. Maybe James is right to. To what? To question whether someone who has spent 3 years loving him with every fiber of her being might have had an ulterior motive. Victoria's voice was sharp with anger. Do you know what I think about when I watch you with my son? Aliyah shook her head. I think about the way you hold his hand during thunderstorms because you know he's been afraid of them since he was 7. I think about how you learned French because he mentioned wanting to visit Provence someday. I think about how you convinced him to reconnect with his college friends because you could see he was lonely. Victoria's voice grew stronger, more certain. I think about how you've never once asked him to buy you anything extravagant, how you still drive the same car you had when you met him, how you give away half your salary to charity, even though you could afford to live like a queen. But I knew who he was, Aliyah repeated, as if it were a confession of guilt. So what? Victoria demanded. You think love is only valid if it happens in complete ignorance. You think it's more pure if you meet someone and have no idea who they are. She leaned forward, forcing Aliyah to meet her eyes. Darling girl, do you think I didn't research James's father before I agreed to marry him? Do you think your husband didn't know exactly who I was and what my family was worth when he courted me? Information is not manipulation. Knowledge is not deception. Then why does it feel like I've been lying to him? Because someone is trying to make it feel that way, Victoria said grimly. Someone who has done this before to this very family and is doing it again. Before Aliyah could ask what she meant, they heard footsteps on the front porch. Victoria squeezed her hand. Don't you dare run. Whatever happens next, you stand your ground and fight for your marriage. Thomas Blackwood entered the house with James behind him, both men looking grim. James's eyes immediately found Aliyah, and she saw something flicker across his face. Regret, longing, confusion. I've spent the last 4 hours tracing the source of that article, Thomas announced without preamble. The leak came from Harrison Caldwell. He's the one who paid for the investigation into Aliyah's background. He's the one who reached out to Anthony Mason and paid him to fabricate those quotes. James went very still. Caldwell, the same man who hired Penelope to destroy you 7 years ago. The same man who has been systematically trying to damage Wellington Industries ever since. Thomas's voice was ice cold. He's playing the same game, James, and you're letting him win. But the research Aliyah did was academic work, Thomas interrupted. I have her actual thesis, James. All of it. She studied 12 different wealthy families, including mine. Her conclusions were about social responsibility and the moral obligations of inherited wealth. There's nothing manipulative about it. James looked at Aliyah, who was watching him with red-rimmed eyes but lifted chin. Why didn't you tell me you knew who I was when we met? Because I was afraid, she said quietly, her voice steady despite her tears. I was afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking now. That I was using you. And were you? The question hung in the air like a blade. Victoria held her breath. Thomas watched with sharp eyes, and Aliyah made her choice. She stood slowly, with the dignity of a queen facing execution. If you have to ask me that, she said, her voice clear and strong, then you don't know me at all. And if you don't know me after 3 years of marriage, then maybe we never had what I thought we had. She pulled off her wedding ring, the 10-carat diamond that had once felt like a shield, and placed it on the coffee table between them. I won't beg you to believe in our love, James. I won't plead my case or try to convince you that my feelings are real. If 3 years of my life, my choices, my actions aren't proof enough, then nothing I say tonight will be. She moved toward the hallway, then stopped and turned back. But I want you to know something. When I was 12 years old and my parents died, I promised myself I would never again love someone who couldn't love me back completely. I thought I'd found that with you. Her voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. I was wrong. And then she walked upstairs, leaving the three of them in stunned silence. James stared at the ring on the table, the symbol of their love reduced to an abandoned piece of jewelry. The choice was his now. Believe the lies designed to destroy him, or fight for the love that had saved him. But first, he had to decide if he was brave enough to choose love over fear. The sound of Aliyah packing upstairs was like a countdown to the end of everything James had ever wanted. Each open drawer, each closed suitcase zipper, marked another second closer to losing the only woman who had ever truly loved him. Victoria and Thomas had left him alone with his choice, but their words echoed in the silence. You're letting him win. If 3 years aren't proof enough. She's everything Penelope wasn't. James picked up Aliyah's wedding ring, the diamond catching the lamplight like captured tears. He thought about the moment he'd proposed, how her eyes had filled with joy, not calculation. How she'd said yes before she'd even looked at the ring, because she was looking at him. He thought about their wedding day, when she'd insisted on writing her own vows. I promise to love you not for what you can give me, but for who you are when you think no one is watching. I promise to be your soft place to land and your strength when you need to stand. He thought about the morning after Penelope left, when he'd been convinced he'd never love again. And then he thought about the first morning he'd woken up next to Aliyah, how the sun through their bedroom window had turned her skin to gold, how she'd smiled at him with sleep-soft eyes and whispered, "Good morning, husband," like it was the most beautiful word in any language. Slowly, James climbed the stairs. He found Aliyah in their bedroom, folding clothes with the methodical precision of someone trying not to fall apart. She didn't look up when he entered, but her hands stilled on the silk blouse she was packing. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "Back to Brooklyn. I still have my apartment there." Her voice was steady, but he could see tears falling onto the fabric in her hands. "Aliyah." He stepped closer, and she finally looked up. Her eyes were red but clear, filled with a kind of strength he'd never seen before. "I've been thinking about our first date." She frowned, clearly not expecting this. "Our first date? You wore that blue dress with the little flowers on it. We went to that tiny Italian place in Little Italy because you said you wanted to go somewhere that felt real, not impressive." James sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch her suitcase. "And when the waiter assumed I would order for both of us, you ordered for yourself in perfect Italian, and then told him exactly how you wanted your pasta prepared." "I remember," she whispered. "I remember thinking that you were the first woman I'd ever dated who didn't seem to need me to be anyone other than who I was." His voice grew stronger. "You didn't care about my money. You cared about whether I tipped the busboy well. You didn't care about my connections. You cared about whether I was kind to the elderly couple struggling with their English at the next table." Aliyah's hands had stopped moving entirely now. "And when I walked you home that night, you kissed me goodnight on your stoop, not because you wanted something from me, but because you wanted me." James reached into his pocket and pulled out her wedding ring. "I fell in love with you that night, and I've fallen deeper in love with you every day since." "James," she started, but he held up a hand. "I don't care that you knew who I was when we met. I don't care that you researched my family for your thesis. I don't care about any of it." His voice broke slightly. "What I care about is that I just spent the worst hour of my life realizing that I would rather be a fool who believes in love than a smart man who lives without it." He held out the ring, but didn't move closer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to forget what I said downstairs. I'm asking you to come home." Aliyah stared at the ring, then at his face. "What's changed? Tomorrow there will be another article, another lie, another reason to doubt me. What's changed is that I finally understand the difference between Penelope and you." James's voice was quiet but certain. "Penelope tried to become what she thought I wanted. You never tried to be anything other than exactly who you are. And who you are is the woman I want to spend the rest of my life loving. Even if that woman is from Brooklyn? Even if she grew up poor? Even if she doesn't fit into your world perfectly? Especially then." James smiled through his tears. "Because that woman taught me what real strength looks like, what real love feels like, what it means to build something together instead of just inheriting it." Aliyah looked down at her suitcase, half packed with the remnants of their life together. Then she looked back at her husband, really looked at him, seeing past his fear to the man who had held her through nightmares and celebrated her victories and chosen her every single day for 3 years. "I'm tired of proving I belong here," she said softly. "Then don't." James finally moved closer, until he was kneeling beside her chair. Just belong. Just be my wife. Just let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. She took the ring from his palm, feeling its familiar weight. If I put this back on, things have to be different. No more doubts. No more tests. No more waiting for me to prove I'm worthy. No more doubts, he agreed. But can I ask for one thing? What? Next time someone tries to destroy us, can we face them together? Can we trust each other enough to fight side by side instead of letting them divide us? Aliyah slipped the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. Together, she agreed. James pulled her into his arms, and she melted against him like she was coming home. I love you, he whispered into her hair. I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible attempts at apple pie. Hey, she protested, laughing through her tears. Your mother said my last attempt was almost edible. My mother also loves you, James said. She told me if I let you leave, she was disowning me and adopting you instead. They held each other in the golden light of their bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of a life built together. Photos from their honeymoon, books they'd read to each other, the coffee mug she'd bought him that said "World's Okayest Husband," because she claimed he was fishing for compliments. Do you think we can really put this behind us? Aliyah asked. I think we can do anything, James replied, as long as we do it together. 6 months later, the kitchen at the Wellington estate smelled like cinnamon and triumph. Aliyah pulled a perfect apple pie from the oven while Victoria applauded from her seat at the kitchen island. Finally, Victoria exclaimed, I was beginning to think you'd never master the crust. I had a good teacher, Aliyah replied, setting the pie on the cooling rack with a satisfied smile. James entered the kitchen and immediately moved to wrap his arms around his wife from behind. How did the interview go? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. The Times wants to do a full feature on the literacy program expansion, Aliyah said, leaning back against him. They're calling it From Brooklyn to Boardrooms, How One Woman is Changing Education in America. I'm so proud of you, James murmured. Victoria watched her son and daughter-in-law together and felt a deep satisfaction. The attacks on their marriage had only made them stronger. Harrison Caldwell was facing federal charges for corporate espionage. Anthony Mason had been exposed as a paid liar, and the Wellington family had emerged from the storm more united than ever. Now, Victoria announced, who wants to try this pie and tell me if my daughter-in-law has finally learned the family recipe? As James and Aliyah laughed and reached for plates, Victoria thought about second chances and the courage it took to choose love over fear. She thought about her son, who had learned to trust again, and her daughter-in-law, who had taught them all what real strength looked like. And as the late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating 3 people who had fought for each other and won, Victoria Wellington smiled and thought that some families were worth fighting for. Some love stories, after all, were worth every battle. When faced with doubt and external pressure, how do we choose to trust the love we've built rather than the fears that try to tear it down? What does it mean to fight for each other instead of against each other?